Welcome to The Future and You. Ideas and opinion about the future based on verifiable facts of today. This episode is for April 15, 2015. I am your host, Euin Cobb. Our guest today is Robert J. Sawyer. Topics we discuss include radical life extension, how mind uploading might be misused in horrific ways, his critique of the methods used by the SETI project in their search for extraterrestrial civilizations, the most reasonable answers to the Fermi Paradox, and his expectations concerning quantum computers and why the NSA is buying them. In addition to being a science enthusiast like me, Robert J. Sawyer is one of only 8 writers in history and the only Canadian to win all 3 of the world's top science fiction awards for Best Novel of the Year, the Hugo, the Nebula, and the John W. Campbell Memorial Award. The full list of those 8 winners includes 5 people I have interviewed: Frederik Pohl, David Brin, Joe Haldeman, Kim Stanley Robinson, and Robert J. Sawyer, as well as 3 people I have not interviewed: Arthur C. Clarke, Connie Willis, and Paolo Bacigalupi. I apologize to Mr. B if I'm mangling your name. Robert J. Sawyer is also an award-winning scriptwriter and an in-demand keynote speaker. This interview was recorded using Skype on March 22, 2015. And now, on to our interview. Here is Robert J. Sawyer. You explore many possible scientifically based futures in your work. And so, before I ask about their specifics, let me ask you, do you see your science fiction as being at least somewhat predictive or perhaps cautionary tales, or are they just stories for enjoyment and nothing more?
I'm what they call a hard science fiction writer. That means that the science in my work is accurate insofar as it is present-day science, or reasonably extrapolated from what we really do know insofar as it is future science. It's not just made-up stuff. And in fact, I get very angry when I read in a newspaper article or some commentator on TV dismissively refer to something as just science fiction, as if science fiction and fantasy were the same thing. I'm not trying to predict the future. That's a mug's game and no one can succeed at it. I am trying to predict a plausible future. And very often, yes, I am known as an optimistic writer, it is a plausible future that we might want to move towards. But certainly some of the time for me, and a great deal of the time for many of my colleagues, we're doing what Ray Bradbury so famously said we should do. We're not trying to predict the future, but rather we are trying to prevent the future by vividly portraying a scenario that we don't want to have come true.
So it's partly cautionary tales then?
It's absolutely partially cautionary tales. Science fiction serves a very important role in our cultural landscape. There is nobody whose job it is in the academic world or in the regulatory/governmental world to think in very long terms. Academics think towards their next quarterly funding review or their next deadline for making a grant application, or maybe for their annual performance review for the university. Governments never think longer than the mandate of the current government, which is, of course, 4 years federally in your country and no more than 5.5 years in my country. Somebody has to be there doing the job of saying, yeah, but where's this going to leave us 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 500 years, a millennium down the road? That's the science fiction writer's brief, is to accomplish that task. And we do it not as boosters, as mindless boosters of science and technology, nor do we do it as Luddites who are constantly saying, wait a minute, there are some things man was not meant to know. But we do it the way William Gibson, another Canadian science fiction writer of great renown, has said, our job is to be profoundly ambivalent about changes in science and technology. Yes, they can be cautionary tales. Yes, they can be utopian tales. More than anything, they are realistic tales. Realistic. That's what science fiction is supposed to be.
Immortality and cellular regeneration are important themes in your novels. Do you anticipate radical life extension at some point in the future?
I've had to face this question very directly because my younger brother passed away in the summer of 2013 from lung cancer. He had 9 months from his terminal diagnosis to his passing, and we're coming up slowly but surely on 2 years since we lost him. He and I were only 16 months apart in age. He left us at 51 years of age. And for me to kind of blithely say, as I had in many an interview before his diagnosis, oh yes, the age of death is soon to be beyond us. Science is marching ahead in senescence research, and before you know it, we will be reaching what Aubrey de Grey, the great senescence researcher, says is escape velocity, where the average human lifespan will increase by more than 1 year for every year that passes, in which case we're on the road to practical immortality. Those are very blithe and easy comments to make until you get hit right in the face with somebody you love very close to you, facing the fact that, you know what, our old foe cancer, we're not really close to dealing with that. Most people who get diagnoses of cancer, of serious cancer, still pass away from it. And nobody in the entire history of this planet has ever lived more than maybe 120 years at the outside. So do I think that we will crack the enigma of death? Absolutely. There's nothing supernatural about life, and there's certainly nothing supernatural about death. Of course, it is a tractable bioengineering issue. We will solve it at some point. Are we about to solve it? My God, I wish we were. I don't think so. I think, though, since I'm, as we speak right now, I'm 54 years old. And given that I've got good Swedish ancestry and my parents are both in their 90s and still alive and well, it seems quite likely that I'll live over a century. Which means that, given at the rate at which science and technology advances, yeah, I think it's a tractable problem. Yeah, I think it's one we'll solve probably in or close to what's left of my lifetime. Which means I, and people my age, are likely either the very last generation who will know a normal 70 plus or minus a couple of decades lifespan, or the very first generation who will know a radically prolonged lifespan. Obviously, all things being equal, I'd rather be in that second cohort than the first.
Years ago, I asked Stanley Robinson, we were talking about life extension, radical life extension. I asked him, how long are you willing to live? I said, are you willing to live 300, 400 years, or 1,000? What are you comfortable with? Or is that a ridiculous question?
No, it's not a ridiculous question. In fact, there's a real possibility that we will live, an extra few decades within my lifetime. That's different, not just quantitatively, but qualitatively, than living to see the fourth millennium and the fifth millennium, and living to see, the continents appreciably drift from their current positions, living to see the sun expand and then finally grow dim. There is a real difference between, a couple more decades. Who wouldn't like that? A few more $1,000s a year in income. Who wouldn't like that? And having all the money in the world and living forever. They're clearly different things. That said, I change as the years go by. I'm not the awkward, geeky guy I was at 14 who didn't know how to talk to girls. And for instance, I'm, a reasonably suave and glib and self-assured adult now. So the me who will exist in 20 years isn't the me who existed 20 years ago. And I suspect the me that exists 1,000 years or 10,000 years from now, if such a being does have any existence at all, will be so radically different from the guy doing this interview with you right now, Stephen, that it's not a question of how many years do I want to live in stasis, stuck at being Robert J. Sawyer circa 2015, but how many years of intellectual, spiritual, emotional growth I would like to continue to go through, and that is an infinite number. There are always new things to learn. There are always new challenges. It's only those who allow themselves to stagnate in life who would feel that, okay, yeah, I've done everything I can actually accomplish. without actually setting any new goals for myself or deciding to learn a new discipline or really trying to make the world a better place. Yeah, I'm done. I'm good. This is enough time. You got any loftier goals than that? All the time in the world may not be enough.
Religion plays a large part in a lot of your fiction, especially science versus religion. What is it about religion that makes it so fascinating to explore?
I don't use the versus in between those two things. Mm-hmm. I was given an honorary doctorate by the University of Winnipeg last year, jointly sponsored by the Dean of Science and the, by that time, retired Dean of Theology, because of the thoughtful treatment of the science and religion dialogue, not science versus religion debate, in my work. There's no question that the majority of the human race believes in a higher power. I do not. I'm an atheist. I've been an atheist as far back as I can remember. My parents, as far as I can tell, are atheists. And I see no credible reason to believe in any sort of supernatural power that takes any direct interventionist interest in my life or in the lives of all those people who were battered by Hurricane Katrina, or who are starving currently in Africa, or who were ushered into the gas chambers in World War II, or any of the other countless things you would expect an interventionist God to kind of say, oh, yeah, you need me? Here I am. So that model has never worked for me. And yet I'm not arrogant enough to think that the majority of the human race is somehow benighted on this issue, and I am the only one who knows the truth. I believe in rational thinking, but I also am cognizant of the fact that in the genetic lottery, my 3 male cousins all came up colorblind. When I told them, and we discovered this when we were kids and we were talking about this, and I told them, I look over there and you see that thing, what color is that? And they say, it's grayish. And I say, no, actually, it's 2 distinct colors. It's both red and green. We're celebrating Christmas here, and we use contrasting colors. And they said, no, it all looks the same to me. They didn't for 1 second say, you're pulling my leg, Rob. Come on, seeing colors that nobody else can see? Come on, what are you talking about? They said, oh, there's a reality larger than the reality that hitherto, or indeed genetically, I'm capable of ascertaining. But others seem to have ascertained it. So I am not at all dismissive of those who have religious beliefs. If they have mindless philosophies that don't bear any sort of critical examination based on those religious beliefs, then I want to call into question the rationality. But if they claim that they experience something that I seem genetically incapable of also experiencing, I don't want to be the arrogant colorblind guy telling the police officer after the car accident, red light, green light, it's all the same. Who can tell the difference?
The search for extraterrestrial intelligence. You've explored that in many of your novels. Do you believe that there is intelligent life out there? And if so, do you think we will ever detect it?
We come back to a question that follows on the previous one about religion. Do I believe? No, absolutely not. There is zero credible evidence that extraterrestrial life exists. There's not one iota of evidence to suggest that there actually is extraterrestrial life. So I don't believe in it. Do I think extraterrestrial life is likely, given how large the universe is, how mediocre in most respects our solar system and this particular planet happens to be? Then I say, yeah, it's an awfully big universe, and there's so many different worlds. We discover thousands, literally thousands more each year now. So many different worlds out there. Why would I presume arrogantly that I'm the only one? But there's a difference between saying there's a possibility, indeed a probability, that there may be other intelligent forms of life, and this almost fervent religious belief, taken by some, I'll have you know, in the SETI community. Yes, they have to be out there. I'm convinced to a moral certainty that things that I haven't seen and everywhere I've actually looked for have turned out not to be there, nonetheless must exist. That's a religious, not a scientific position, and one, again, that I'm genetically predisposed not to take.
What's your take on the methods used by the SETI project?
The single biggest problem with the methods used by the SETI project is they are 20th and 21st century humanity trying to guess at the communications methodologies that will be used by races that are probably centuries, if not millennia, if not millions of years more advanced than we are. If you had asked William Shakespeare how we might someday communicate with a guy like me in Toronto or a guy like you in South Carolina, he would have said, well, I can write them a letter right now and I can foresee in the future faster boats that might get the letter to them more quickly, or maybe even, some sort of flying machine that could carry the paper letter there the way a bird does now, the way we do with passenger pigeons. He would have no conception that the way we would do it would be through electromagnetic waves propagating not through the ether, because there is no such thing, but through empty space. And we're trying to sit down and say to ourselves, okay, so those beings that might exist in orbit around Tau Ceti, what technology might they come up with 1 million years from now that we could eavesdrop on? That's the problem with the whole SETI undertaking. Now, if you do take it that for whatever reason, vastly advanced civilizations choose to make themselves known to inferior civilizations such as us, then maybe listening for radio beacons might be the way to do it. But an even better way to do it, given that way before any species has radio, it probably has some sort of optical system, that is, it can see, would simply for them to have arranged a whole group of stars. And when we're talking about civilizations with technologies billions of years ahead of our own, billions with a Carl Sagan B, why wouldn't they be able to move around a bunch of stars and put them in a great big perfect circle with a couple of dots and a smiling underline beneath them and shine a happy face out at the universe to say, hey, look, we're here. The idea that they're sort of kind of sending beacons, but not really easy to find beacons that we have to listen to with gigantic telescopes for years seems, again, well, I kind of hope, that God is acknowledging my presence in some subtle and mysterious way that if I just pray long enough, I will be privy to.
Some people have suggested that the reason for the Fermi Paradox is not so much that civilizations aren't out there, but that they're hiding out of fear of being found. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's one of 3 good answers to the Fermi Paradox. The second one is they're not there. The third one is that they just don't live very long. That, like ourselves, who have only been a radio broadcasting civilization for 120 years now, since 1895, that, we made it 120 years, and we made it about half that length having nuclear weapons and about a quarter of that length having really serious biological weapons. How long are we going to survive? Is it going to be to the end of this century? Maybe. The end of this millennium? I wouldn't bet on it. So that's one good answer. The other answer is that if even one vastly advanced civilization is rapacious, murderous, avaricious, or just plain xenophobic, then it behooves every other civilization to hide from them. And when we start talking about, and we throw out all these numbers, we say, oh, the Milky Way has this number of stars, and that percentage of them have planets. You go down the whole Drake equation to say, and so it must be teeming with civilizations. Then you've got to ask the next question. Is even one of those something that makes Al-Qaeda look like rank amateurs? Something that is bent on the destruction of those that don't share whatever its belief system might be, and do we all have to hide from them? And you got to say, yeah, that's actually, no matter how altruistic you think the vast bulk of advanced civilizations might be, that's certainly a valid answer for why most of them decide, holy cow, let's just lay low and hope the marauders don't notice us.
Yeah, it would only take one bad player out of millions.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
That said, I did write in one of my novels, and since it's part of the trick ending, I won't tell you which one.
Okay.
But I did write in one of my novels about aliens who just decided basically the best thing they could do is go around and just, at least in their local area, do things that would make sure that whether or not the star system had any life in it currently, that it never could have life in it. Just to be on the safe side. Not that they were the marauders, you understand. They were afraid that we might emerge as the marauders. So out of enlightened self-interest, they nonetheless became genocidal.
But were they destroying life forms that were already intelligent, or only the
they were
okay.
sterilizing worlds, whether or not they had life on them, just to be on the safe side, and telling themselves it was the only prudent thing to do. Better safe than sorry. Collateral damage in our own mission to just make sure that nobody ever messes with us.
Okay. Yeah, I wrote an alien like that in my novel Skin Brain. Let me ask you...
We'll compare copyright dates, and I'll have a word with my lawyer. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. What is your anticipation of the future of quantum computing? I know that you've written about that in some of your stories.
Yes, I've written about it a lot. Factoring Humanity, which was a Hugo nominee from 1998. Hominids, a Hugo winner from 2003. Both deal with quantum computing. And I think, inevitably, we're going to have really sophisticated quantum computers. We already probably have some decent quantum computers. There's a Canadian company called D-Wave that has been selling quantum computers commercially to clients like Google and IBM for a couple of years now. They're being taken seriously, although the physicists are still scratching their heads and not yet sure whether the results that are being generated are only explicable through quantum mechanical processes or might have a classical physics explanation, which means that the machines merely appear to be quantum computers. I think we're definitely going to have them. Again, it's not an intractable engineering problem. That said, the range of things that quantum computing may be useful for may be a very narrow subset of all the things that we use computers for. So they might change the world, and they might, if you think, for instance, that our own brains are quantum mechanical in the way they give rise to consciousness, as, say, the physicist Roger Penrose and the anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff have contended in the scientific literature for a quarter of a century now. If you think they're right, or competing but similar theories are right, then, yeah, this may be the inroad that gives us actual other self-aware consciousnesses. Or it may just turn out to be a really good way of doing certain arcane mathematical problems more quickly, in which case, it's an incremental improvement, but not a game changer.
Yeah, my understanding is that there's a lot of interest and enthusiasm amongst researchers, including the NSA. Edward Snowden leaked that NSA was researching it for cryptography, or what is it called, code breaking.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question that the method we use for most cryptography, which is based on trying to determine the prime number factors of large numbers, something that traditional computers, by definition, take an enormously long amount of time to accomplish, and that quantum computers, by definition, can do almost instantaneously. I would been shocked if the NSA had not been looking into this. As I say, I wrote in a 1998 novel, Factoring Humanity. The factoring in the title was all about the prime number factoring of quantum encryption keys. I'd like to think that the NSA doesn't just read my science fiction, but Greg Egan's and everybody else's who is doing important stuff in the area of quantum computing and privacy.
My understanding is that if we do develop quantum computing, that it can be, for certain problems, as many as millions of times faster than a conventional computer.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the simple reality is this. A conventional computer tries one answer, tests it. Is it right? Is it wrong? If wrong, try another answer, test it, and keep doing that sequentially, one after another. And a quantum computer, a sufficiently large and complex one, tries multiple or indeed all possible answers simultaneously. And of course, that is quite literally millions, if not arguably infinitely faster than trying one at a time. So yeah, they can be real game changers, but we have much debate still about what range of problems are solvable by the quantum computing technology. That is, I can say, okay, tell me what all the possible factors of this big number are. No question. A quantum computer can do it better. Tell me what the best plan for social justice to make sure that the 1% doesn't take everything and lead to another American revolution where the vastly armed populace rises up and kills that 1% off. Can a quantum computer solve that more quickly than a traditional computer? Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Let me ask you, you've explored the notion of copied or uploaded human consciousness, aka mind uploading. Do you anticipate that this will become doable?
Yes. Again, I'm a hard science fiction writer, so everything I write, I believe, is at least possible and more often actually plausible. You have only two ways of looking at human consciousness. One is it's a soul. It's a divinely inspired spark given to you by a metaphysical creator. If that's your position, I say ironically, God bless you and go upon your way. Science has nothing to say to you on that topic. If your position is any other, namely that consciousness somehow emerged in Homo sapiens when our own matter, gray matter, when our own brains reached a sufficient level of neuronal complexity, then obviously there's nothing supernatural about it. If there's nothing supernatural about it, then it is clearly replicable. If it's replicable, it's probably replicable on multiple substrates. And there should be nothing but mere engineering between recognizing the problem and actually being able to do it. Indeed, my own degree actually is in broadcasting, and I used to teach audio for television production. After I graduated, I went back and taught at Ryerson University, one of the things I taught. I didn't have to know anything about musical genius, and in fact, I don't. I have very little musical talent myself, and I'm a terrible singer. I'm pretty much tone deaf. Doesn't matter. I don't have to understand any of that stuff to make a flawless digital copy of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and hand it to you on a CD or a DVD. I can absolutely take whatever it was that was the genius in that work of art and digitize it at whatever level of digital resolution you require so that you can no longer tell the difference, and hand it to you without ever once actually knowing what musical genius is or even appreciate why that's a better piece of music than, say, the latest little Taylor Swift ditty. Our engineers will do the same thing with the consciousness between our ears, probably even before we actually understand what consciousness is. You'll just move the consciousness along with everything else, digitize everything in the brain, and the consciousness goes with that digital copy.
This will open up a lot of options. Some of those will be potential benefits. Some of them may be misuses, potential misuses, or even dangers. What's your take on the uses and how they might be, used or misused? And I'm thinking mind uploading specifically, where it's an actual person's personality that has been, moved, so to speak, or transferred from their body.
When I started being a writer with a computer in the 1980s, you would hear every one of your colleagues, and you yourself probably went through the experience of losing a day, a week, even a month's worth of work. Why? Because you didn't back up. When I hear that story today, do you have any sympathy? Do I have any sympathy when somebody says, oh, you know what, the only copy of my novel, it's gone? Well, I didn't make any copies of it. I didn't use Dropbox. I didn't even print it out. It was just this one copy, and I had every bit of faith that it would never get damaged or lost. Now, if we care about our novels or our grocery lists or our annual Christmas letter to friends and family enough to back them up routinely, not just on site, but to the cloud as well, why would we say that our very essence of who we are is something that we should keep in the most fragile of containers? If you were to drop my computer, I live in a 23rd floor penthouse. If you were to drop my computer off the 23rd floor here, I have a solid state drive in it, I bet you even money that I could recover 100% of the data. If I were to drop off the 23rd floor here, I would bet you whatever amount of money you cared to name that you would never be able to recover the data that was in my brain. Why we carry around the most important data and the most important construct, our personality, without backing it up is beyond me. Once the technology is available, it will be as foolish not to back it up as it is today foolish not to back up our important data.
Have you written misuses in some of your stories of mind uploading?
Yes. One of my favorite fields to write about is neuroscience. And it's funny, my father was an economist, and they call economics the dismal science. But it isn't really. neuroscience in some ways is the dismal science, because so much of what we know about neuroscience comes through the horrific accidents that have been visited upon human beings. Phineas Gage is the classic example of a guy who had a tamping iron blown up in an explosion through the bottom of his skull, and people have studied now for over a century the changes it made in his personality, having this core blown out of his brain. He survived. What were the incidences that changed because of that? Most neuroscience, most mind science has moved ahead because of unfortunate people who have had birth defects or traumatic injuries. So what happens in my novel Mind Scan is a guy walks into a place that specializes in uploading consciousnesses, and indeed they make him the copy that he wants, and there he is, taken out of his frail and doomed physical form and put into a perfect android body. And he discovers, and they also made an essentially infinite number of duplicate copies that they could damage in all sorts of ways so that they could do those neuroscience experiments. Well, what if we lop off this part of his brain? What if we put a lesion here? What if we damage him there? What would we learn about how consciousness works and where it is located in various parts of the anatomy? So that would be, yes, it was a horrific series of mad scientist experiments being visited on this poor sap or duplicates of him because of the dismal nature of the science of neuroscience, of brain studies, without being able to do this kind of experiment.
Yeah, that is kind of horrific.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds like the Nazi experiments with throwing people into cold water to see how long it took them to die.
Exactly. And, this is the biggest thing to learn about human brain studies, of course, is our capacity for empathy is such a fragile thing. And so many a scientist so easily gives up on any empathy for the experimental subject, and indeed is told and taught, always write in the dispassionate third person. Always make sure that you never get involved with your subjects. Always make sure that you are the cool, calculating outsider. And then is it any wonder that when given just a little bit of latitude, a great number of them commit pretty horrific acts? Every museum you go to is filled with collections that were gathered in the 19th and 20th centuries of birds and mammals and frogs and fish taken by people who putatively loved these things. It was their area of study. And what they did is they went out, and whenever they found a nice, pretty one, they killed it. They killed it, and they skinned it, and they shipped it back home, and it was put on display, and everybody said, "Isn't that wonderful?" I was just at the Royal Ontario Museum, actually, looking at their passenger pigeons.
Oh, an extinct species.
An extinct species, exactly. One where we all blithely thought, hey, I can kill one too. I can kill 10 of them. Let's kill 100 of them. Mm-hmm. Oh, whatever happened to all the passenger pigeons? Oh, well, thank God for those scientists who gassed them and killed them and stuffed them and put them in glass cases so that we can be reminded of what they used to be like when they were alive.
That was Robert J. Sawyer. You can learn more about him using the links I've placed in the show's blog post, which is located at thefutureandyou.libsyn.com. Libsyn is spelled Libsyn.
That's it for this episode of The Future and You. This program is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivative Works 2.5 license. A copy of this license may be viewed at creativecommons.org. Briefly, this means you may, indeed you are encouraged to, copy this entire program as many times as you wish and give it away to as many people as you wish. But you may not copy only a portion of this program, you may not charge anyone any amount of money for it, and you may not use any portion of it to make something new. On the other hand, anyone whose obvious goal is to recommend the show to others automatically gets special dispensation. Offline reviews, which include the show's website, may include brief quotes. And online reviews, such as for a blog or community group or web page, which provide a conspicuous link to the show's website, may use as many quotes as they wish, up to and including a transcript of 1/2 of any interview. The show's theme music is a blues number called Some Sympathy by Chris Jurgensen and is from his album Big Bad Sun, which is available at magnatune.com. Magnatune is an independent record label that sells its catalog of music through online downloads and print-on-demand CDs. The company allows artists to retain full rights to their music and splits equally with an artist all the revenue from the sale of their work. All the music at Magnatune may be previewed free of charge, and customers can even choose how much they want to pay for the music, with pricing ranging from $5 to $18 per album. You can learn more about them at magnatune.com. That's spelled magnatune.com. If you have a theory or opinion about what the future will contain, be it the near future or the far future, you may email it to me at thefutureandyou.com. That's thefutureandyou.com. You may also suggest topics that you would like to hear discussed, or send contact information for experts that you feel might provide valuable insights into the future. Mind you, an expert is not necessarily someone with an impressive degree. The best experts are the people who live or work or strive in the area under discussion. If the subject is science or medicine or academia, a degree is important, but if the discussion concerns trends in construction or firefighting or video gaming, a degree is pretty much meaningless. To get the inside dope, you've got to find the people who actually do this stuff every day. They are the first to see the trends because the trends have already begun changing their lives. As to the topics we will explore in the next episode of The Future and You, I can make no guarantees. Interviews are still being sought, recorded, and edited. All I can promise is that we will ruminate on the future. To learn more, check the show's website at thefutureandyou.com. If you enjoyed the program, please mention it to a friend, and be sure to join me again next time. Until then, I have been your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. On behalf of myself and all my guests, I thank you for listening.